Well, well, well. Didn't expect to be needing you so soon. 3, 2, 1, let's leap.
Quantum leap.
Look, I'm Woody. Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to Salvation, y'all. That's right, although I don't know how you'd be expected to get that from what I just said, but we're talking Quantum Leap. I've seen Season 1, Episode 5 of the revived series entitled Salvation or Bust, so now it's time to talk about it. Quick note, if you're new here, spoilers are ahead, so consider yourself warned. Now let's go. We pick up in this episode pretty much where we left off in the prior episode, with Ben inside the body of an older man in what appears to be the late 1800s. We discover fairly quickly that the plot of this episode will revolve around the fact that he is a pretty famous, well-known gunslinger past his prime, and he's back in town for his granddaughter as the town is in the process of being taken over by the railroad with some hired goons, especially a very wanted goon, trying to force them out by any means necessary, although we do discover that he would prefer them to take the money and leave than a deadly force type of situation. Either way, they're going to be forced out of the town unless we can do something about that. Going into this episode, I was not really sure if we were truly going to be in the 1800s or if it would turn out to be some sort of trick where we find out that they're in a town doing a cowboy reenactment or a play or on a movie set or something like that. But no, we actually are in the Old West. I do have to admit, I was fairly apprehensive over the whole concept of doing the cliche cowboy story in a time travel episode, but I honestly think it turned out pretty well. There were, of course, some very stereotypical things, but the show even seemed to be aware of that and call them out on a couple of occasions. There were a couple of different instances when someone even name-dropped the title of famous Western or Western-adjacent movies, so that even added a little game, a little Easter egg hunt to try and figure those things out while you were going through the episode. One of the ones that stuck out to me most was There Will Be Blood, and then there was a couple references to Get Out of Dodge, things of that nature. I was guessing that since the leap was so far back in time, the normal Quantum Leap crew would be unable to project Adagram or hologram Addison, I'm trying to come up with a better way to say that, back that far in time, and they would be scrambling to come up with the energy or the resources to get back that far. And in the meantime, Janice would use the opportunity to link herself back to Ben. She would obviously be unaware of what we learned in the previous episode, that Ben has now regained his memory of who Addison is to him, and that she was in fact his love interest and his fiance, and that Janice would try to play some sort of trick on Ben, or at least convince Ben that she was more important to him than Addison, and that Addison was actually bad. Potentially, she would end up trying to pretend that she was the love interest for Ben, but because of the revelation in last episode, Ben would come on to her and figure her out, and I thought that was where we were going, but no, there actually wasn't any Janice in this episode, and Addison was able to come back to him no problem. There was no issues with power drain or anything like that. Glad I was wrong, because if I'm always right about my theories, then it kind of gets boring because I'm just writing the show for myself. But I also do like to be right sometimes. Now, before I get into the revelations of this episode, because there were a few nuggets that slipped in, I do want to go over the present day stuff. Now, I like the fact that the Government Oversight Committee is already catching on to the fact that something is not right with the program. They've noticed the power drain, and they send Congresswoman Kavita Adani to see what's going on. She's part of this committee, or at least she reports to this committee, and obviously there's a ton of government funding being funneled into this thing, so they have a very vested interest in knowing and understanding exactly what is going on, because in essence, it is their project. So when she gets there, she decides to conduct personal interviews with the entire team, and she wants to start with Ben. This leads all of our characters trying to scramble to come up with a cover story, and I've got to be honest, they did a good job at it, but not such a good job that it's unbelievable as far as the storyline goes. They kind of work together well, but you could tell there's some cracks in the stories and they are scrambling. They come up with a story that Ben is MIA for personal reasons and they don't know when he'll be back or exactly where he is. I really like this whole idea of the interviews of each character one by one with this outside congresswoman coming in to learn more about them. It allowed us, the audience, to get to know more about these side characters in a fairly organic way. I love the revelation about Jen being a former cyber terrorist who turned to the good side after a lot of pressure by Magic, may I add, to join the team. So she was captured by the government. I believe she was even imprisoned, but Magic fought for her to come join this team. But now I am wondering if Magic is more involved than I originally suspected. It was also nice to see Kavita fail to buy the whole story about Ben's leave of absence and the random power surges. Magic was even given a nuclear option to blackmail her, but he decided to come up with an unconventional way to use that by appealing to a loss that they were able to uncover. So she had been keeping the secret where her brother and her had been driving, I guess drunk driving, and they crashed. He died, and they came up with a whole, well, I guess she must have come up with a plan because he was dead, and swapped so that it looked like he had been driving the whole time so that she wouldn't get busted. Using this information, Magic decides not to entirely blackmail her, but he basically says, I know about this. We have this Quantum Leap time travel program where if you just give us some slack, let us do our thing, we could potentially give you the ability to go back in time and save your brother. That's what we're working on here. He admits a little later, this isn't true. They don't have that ability. They're not even working on that ability, but it was a way to kind of manipulate her, get her on their side without blackmailing her, and it was more of a morally dubious play, so I like that. We're not showing the just straight edge commander or the straight edge admiral here. We actually have a little bit of a moral gray area. That is a nice touch. Now, before we discuss the reveal at the end, let's touch on a few tidbits that stuck out to me as important. Now, Ben mentions that he hasn't had a chance to sleep since he started leaping. A, I find this fascinating just as a plot point in and of itself, and B, Addison says true, but if it's any consolation, the people that you leap into do sleep. So it seems to me like this is more confirmation that he is in fact suppressing their minds when he leaps into them, unless she literally meant they are back at the base sedated in his body. But that leads nicely into my next point, where they state that they do not have Ben's body. This is kind of told to us when the Congresswoman comes a-calling. It seems like he literally did entirely convert into energy for his leaps. Now, will they ever address that this is an evolution of the leaping process from the original series, or are they going to act like there was never a waiting room in the original and this is just how things always worked? I personally would like to just have a simple scene where they perhaps visit the old Quantum Leap facility and have Ian walk by the old waiting room and just make a snide comment, something along the lines of, "Oh, I can't believe they actually used to store the leap hosts here. Just imagine what our Quantum Leap program would look like if we hadn't compensated for the corporeal imbalance and converted the leap into a unidirectional transference of the subject's matter-energy matrix." You know, some other science fiction sounding tech that really doesn't mean anything, but sounds like it's a nice evolution of the technology in the show. And while we're on the subject of Ben's body, Allison called it out when he was drinking some pretty unsafe alcohol, and he replied with something along the lines of, "Good thing this is not my body." That's probably just supposed to be a quick joke, but could it be a slightly more sinister side of Ben starting to show, or maybe even just, I don't know, an emboldened sense of self? I could see him starting to feel pretty invincible and disconnected from the real world after all of his dangerous leaping from time to time, body to body. Taking another thing Addison said to heart, when she first popped in, she told Ben that the whole cowboy thing looked good on him. I guess this confirms the fact that she sees Ben and not the actual person that he is inhabiting. I believe this was the opposite way around in the original Quantum Leap, where Al never really saw Sam. He was always seeing the subject Sam was inside. Very interesting if that's the case. I'll circle back to this because I think it might actually tie into the big reveal of the episode. That reveal? Well, another leaper has entered the arena. That's right, shortly after we believe the day has been saved, a man pulls Ben aside and refers to him by his name, as well as the year 2022, before telling him to stop following me. Looping in the Addison comment I was just referencing, if she can see Ben for who he is while he's inside another body, shouldn't she also have the ability to see the true form of the secondary leaper? If so, I guess this means that his true form is the man that he appeared as in this episode. Otherwise, it could be anyone. It could be a woman, it could be an old man, it could be a kid, it could be anyone. It also might be the case that she is only able to see Ben via her imaging chamber and not another leaper that had leapt from a different location. So you may have noticed I didn't spend too much time discussing the content of the actual leap itself, and that's not because I disliked it. I just found it sort of a nice, quaint throwback to an older era, an older style of television, with a bit of a modern twist. I honestly really like that. In the original Quantum Leap, that was kind of always the appeal. the leap itself. In this show, while I initially thought I would miss that and that would be the thing I was really going back to, I'm actually really finding the mystery and the new information that we get each episode to be the more engaging aspect, the serialized parts, for lack of a better term. Now, don't get me wrong, I am very much enjoying the fact that we're spending more time in the leaps than we did in the first couple episodes. It's just not necessarily the most interesting thread to follow throughout the entire series. I also very much enjoyed the way that he MacGyvered up a solution that didn't actually involve a gunfight, a duel. It would have been very disingenuous to me if he suddenly came up with the ability to be a crack shot or something along those lines. It kind of felt to me like a combo between a couple of Star Trek episodes, Spectre of the Gun from the original series, A Fistful of Datas from TNG, and The Marauders, an Enterprise episode, which ironically enough featured Scott Bakula as Captain Archer himself. This may be way off the mark, but the resolution of this episode sees the town of Salvation, which was founded on a place where people can be who they are, who they're meant to be, regardless of class, gender, race, etc., being a well-established part of history instead of basically disappearing into the ether like it did originally. And this may be going way out on a limb, but does anyone else feel like this may be setting up a safe haven for our characters to seek out at a later point in this season, or maybe even in season 2? I don't know, I'm possibly thinking too much about this, but it seems like some of these leaps may be establishing points in time or things in time that are going to become important later on, and I think we may not have seen the last of Salvation. One more thing I didn't mention earlier, the whole reveal of this secondary leaper, while fun and interesting and kind of out of nowhere, if you look back through the episode knowing that he'll appear, he is scattered throughout the episode. Ben did actually have interactions with this guy earlier on. He was actually the first person, aside from the granddaughter of the person he leapt into, that he had much contact with. He's the one who asked, "Who is this guy that's taking over the town?" This guy pointed at the wanted sign. He also had another interaction with him a couple different times. Don't think they spoke, but just bumped into each other. This guy is seen looking at him. So he was scattered throughout the episode. So was the leaper here when Ben already arrived, or did this leaper arrive after the fact? By saying to him, "Ben, you need to stop following me," I would assume he was here the entire time and was just trying to cobble together the pieces to figure out Ben was in fact the one that was following him. I don't know, I kind of went off track there, but to sum it all up, I did really have fun with this episode. I still think that last week was the peak of the season so far, but this episode added so much to the serialized aspects while also just having fun in its setting that I really can't find too many faults with it. If we can maintain the balance between settings, the present day, and the leap, and also add to the serialized stories in the same way that these past 2 episodes have, then I think this show will absolutely keep being worthy of its watch. But what do you think? Are you invested in what this show has to offer overall, or do you think you just miss the old style? Do you not care at all? Leave all your thoughts below and hit the like button while you're there. But until we meet again, I hope your next leap is a leap home.